Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're using a bunch of news headlines to jump back in time to January 29, 2025, and get a snapshot of what's happening in India.
I love this. It's like we're putting together a puzzle, right? Getting a feel for what life was like on that specific day.
Exactly. And let me tell you, there's a lot going on. We've got a roller coaster stock market, a historic religious gathering, even some cricket drama for our sports fans out there.
And what's so fascinating is how these stories, which seem so different on the surface, are actually all connected. Like take, for example, the anxiety around the union budget, which is scheduled for February 1st. It's got the stock market all jittery.
Yeah, the Nifty and the Sensex are bouncing around like crazy.
Exactly. And it's not just what's happening within India that's causing the jitters. The U.S. Federal Reserve is also meeting, and that's sending shockwaves through global markets.
Oh, right, because they're the ones who set interest rates in the U.S.
Yep. The Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, and their decisions have a ripple effect all over the world. Even here in India, you can see it in the India VIX, which is kind of like a fear gauge for the market.
And right now, that gauge is reading above 18, which I guess means people are pretty nervous.
Right. They're worried about how global events are going to impact India, especially with that budget coming up.
Makes sense. So there's all this talk about the RBI injecting liquidity into the system. Does that just mean they're printing more money?
Not exactly. It's more about making sure there's enough cash flowing around to keep the financial system running smoothly.
Okay, so not like turning on a money printing press. More like, I don't know, greasing the wheels a bit.
That's a good way to put it. The RBI has a bunch of tools they can use, like adjusting reserve requirements for banks or buying and selling government bonds. But it's a delicate balance. They have to be careful not to trigger inflation or distort the market.
Right, because too much of a good thing can sometimes backfire. It's interesting to see how these economic forces are playing out. But there's also a big story happening in the realm of religion and politics. This gathering of three Shankaracharyas at the Mahakumbh, that's a pretty historic event, right?
It is.
Yeah.
You rarely see all three Shankaracharyas, who are considered the highest authorities in Hinduism, come together like this. And the fact that they issued a joint declaration, a Dharmadesh, makes it even more significant.
And that declaration is causing quite a stir, especially with their call to ban cow slaughter nationwide and declare the cow the mother of the nation.
Yeah, it's definitely a controversial statement,
Yeah.
and it's one that could have a real impact on policy, particularly with elections on the horizon.
I mean, just think about the implications for agriculture, food production, even daily life for many Indians.
Exactly. And then there's the question of how this declaration will be used by different political groups. It adds a whole other layer to this snapshot of India we're looking at.
It really blurs the lines between religion, politics, and everyday life. And speaking of politics, let's talk about that surprise announcement from former President Trump about PM Modi visiting the White House in February.
The timing is certainly interesting, with elections coming up in both India and the U.S.
Makes you wonder if it's more about optics than substance.
Could be. It's a chance for both leaders to appeal to their respective diasporas and project a certain image on the global stage. But of course, there's also the potential for some concrete outcomes. Trade deals, defense cooperation, maybe even some progress on regional security issues.
So a lot of potential implications there. And that's what's so fascinating about this deep dive, right? Every headline we uncover seems to reveal another layer of complexity.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize just how interconnected everything is. The economy, politics, religion, global events. It's all part of this intricate tapestry that makes up India.
So out of everything we've talked about so far, what stands out to you the most? What part of this puzzle has you the most intrigued?
That's a tough one. But I think it's the contrast between the economic jitters and the Shankaracharya's declaration that really gets me thinking. On one hand, you have the stock market, a very tangible, measurable indicator of fear and uncertainty. And then on the other hand, you have this powerful statement rooted in faith and tradition, which has the potential to reshape the socio-political landscape. It's almost like we're seeing two different versions of India at the same time.
I like that two different versions of India, the India striving for economic stability and global influence, and the India grappling with ancient beliefs and their impact on the present. And then right in the middle of all that, you've got this outbreak of Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that even amidst all the drama of politics and economics, there are real people dealing with real challenges. Guillain-Barré syndrome is a serious neurological disorder, and the fact that they're still investigating the cause of this outbreak just adds to the anxiety.
It puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Behind every headline, there are human stories unfolding.
Exactly. And sometimes those stories are about finding moments of joy and excitement, even in the face of challenges, like the news of Virat Kohli making a comeback to the Delhi Ranji Trophy team after 12 years.
Oh, yeah, that's huge news for cricket fans, especially in Delhi. What do you think prompted him to return to domestic cricket at this point in his career?
It's hard to say for sure. Maybe he wants to mentor younger players, or perhaps he's looking to rekindle his passion for the game at its roots. Or maybe it's a strategic move to regain his form ahead of the T20 World Cup. Whatever his reasons, it definitely injects a bit of optimism and excitement into our snapshot of this day.
It's a reminder that even amidst uncertainty and anxiety, there's always room for passion and the pursuit of excellence. So we've covered quite a bit of ground already, but our journey through January 29th, 2025 isn't over yet. What else is on the agenda?
Well, there's that intriguing headline about Mukesh Ambani, India's wealthiest businessman, praising Prime Minister Modi. I'm really curious to dig into that and see what it might reveal about the relationship between big business and politics in India.
Welcome back to our deep dive into January 29th, 2025. Before we move on, I've been thinking about that fear gauge, that India VIX. Is it always a bad thing when it's high?
Good question. It's not always bad. High volatility definitely means more risk, but it also means there's more opportunity for bigger gains.
So some investors might actually see this as a good thing.
Exactly. It all depends on their risk tolerance. Some will be running for the hills, while others will be looking to make some bold moves.
Makes sense. So speaking of bold moves, there's that headline about Mukesh Ambani, India's wealthiest businessman. He's out there praising Prime Minister Modi.
Yeah, he compared Modi's determination to a diamond tough and unyielding. Pretty strong statement.
It is, especially with elections coming up. Could be seen as a pretty big endorsement.
Right. Ambani's not just wealthy, he's got a lot of influence too. So when he speaks, people listen.
Yeah, makes you wonder if other business leaders might follow his lead.
It's definitely possible. But of course, it raises some questions too.
Like whether this close relationship between big business and the government is really good for everyone.
Exactly. I mean, a strong public-private partnership could be a good thing for the economy, but it's important to make sure everyone benefits, not just a select few.
Right, finding that balance between progress and equity is always a challenge. And it's something that keeps coming up in these headlines, isn't it? Like with the Reporters Collective losing their nonprofit status.
Yeah, that's a big deal. They're known for their investigative journalism, often digging into sensitive topics.
So some people are seeing this as an attempt to silence them,
Right, it's definitely raising concerns about press freedom in India.
especially with the Shankaracharya's declaration, too. Some people argue that it could limit freedom of expression on certain issues.
That's a great point. You've hit on a key tension there. On one hand, you have traditional values, often championed by religious figures, and on the other, you have the principles of a free press and a liberal democracy. It makes you wonder what kind of India is emerging on the world stage.
Yeah, it's a big question. An India where economic progress trumps everything else, or one where cultural and religious identity plays a defining role.
These are questions that Indians are wrestling with right now. And we see it playing out in these headlines in the markets, in religious gatherings, even on the cricket field.
Speaking of cricket, you mentioned some good news earlier. That whole thing with Virat Kohli returning to the Delhi Ranji Trophy team. What's the story there?
It's a pretty big deal in the cricketing world. I
Hmm.
mean, he's been away for 12 years. Some people think it's a strategic move to get back in shape for the T20 World Cup. Others think he just wants to give back to the game and help mentor younger players.
I can imagine those younger players are pretty excited to have him on the team.
Absolutely. It's an incredible opportunity to learn from a legend.
Mm.
It really speaks to the power of mentorship.
And in a way, it ties back into that theme we keep seeing, right? This idea of India navigating between tradition and progress, the old and the new.
You're right. Whether it's the Shankaracharyas invoking ancient traditions, or the RBI using modern economic tools, or Virat Kohli bringing his experience back to his roots, it all speaks to this idea of finding India's place in a changing world.
It's such a fascinating process to witness, even just through these little glimpses we're getting. So, as you were piecing together this puzzle, what else stood out to you?
Well, while we're on the topic of the Mahakumbh, there's that news about the Akaras calling off the Amrit Snan after January 29th. It's a big deal for the pilgrims who are planning to participate,
Yeah, I bet they're disappointed.
for sure.
Yeah.
But it also shows how important it is to keep everyone safe at an event that big. It's a huge challenge.
Millions of people all coming together like that. It's a logistical nightmare, but also an incredible display of faith and tradition.
It is. And it highlights the delicate balance between those traditions and the realities of managing a huge modern country. But moving back to the economic front, there's also some good news. The Bank Nifty index is actually outperforming the Nifty.
Oh yeah, what's that all about?
It looks like those liquidity measures from the RBI are having an effect. The banking sector really depends on interest rates and cash flow, so it's pretty sensitive to those kinds of moves.
So maybe a little bit of hope amidst all the uncertainty?
It's too early to say for sure,
Mm.
but it does suggest that things might be stabilizing. And it could mean that interest rate cuts are coming.
That would be good news for businesses and just regular people too.
Definitely. Lower interest rates mean it's cheaper to borrow money, which can help boost spending and get the economy moving. But as with everything else we've talked about, it's not that simple.
Right. There are always those ripple effects. You make one move and who knows what's going to happen.
Exactly. It's a complex system. And that's what makes this exploration so fascinating.
It's like we're not just reading headlines. We're trying to get a sense of what it was like to be in India on that day.
Exactly. We're uncovering the stories within the stories. And while we've covered a lot, it feels like we're just scratching the surface.
There's always more to uncover.
Always. We've still got to talk about those headlines from Delhi, the political clashes, and the Yamuna River pollution.
We can't leave those out. We'll be back in a moment to dive into those and wrap up our exploration. And we're back. It's amazing how much we've uncovered already just by looking at these headlines from January 29th, 2025. We've gone from the stock market to religious gatherings to international relations to, well, even a health scare. It's been quite a journey.
It really shows you how much can happen in just one day, especially in a place as dynamic and complex as India. And as we wrap up our deep dive, there are a couple more headlines I want to touch on. Both of them take us to Delhi, where we see this clash between politics and the environment.
You're talking about that whole thing with the Delhi LG and the AAP, right?
Uh,
It seems like they're always going at it.
Yeah, they're constantly battling for control of the capital. And this latest clash is all about who's to blame for the pollution in the Yamuna River. Chief Minister Kejriwal says Haryana is dumping untreated waste into the river. But the LD2 says that's just a political motivated statement.
So it sounds like a classic case of passing the buck, while the river just keeps getting more polluted.
There's definitely some of that going on, but it also points to a bigger problem: the lack of cooperation between states when it comes to shared resources. The Yamuna flows through multiple states, so cleaning it up requires a team effort, not finger-pointing.
Right, pollution doesn't care about state boundaries. And in a country like India, where water is so precious, this lack of cooperation is really concerning.
It is. And this whole clash also highlights that tension between the central government and the Delhi government, which seems to be a recurring theme.
It makes you wonder if all this political infighting is actually holding the country back from making progress on these big issues.
Right. Is this just part of how democracy works, or is it something more dysfunctional? That's a question worth asking.
Definitely. So as we wrap up this exploration of January 29th, 2025, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all this?
I hope they come away with a deeper understanding of just how complex India is. We've seen how economics, religion, politics, it's all intertwined, all shaping the future of the nation.
And even seemingly small events, like Virat Kohli going back to domestic cricket, can tell us something about the bigger picture.
Exactly. India is constantly changing. It's a place where tradition and modernity collide, where there are both immense challenges and incredible opportunities. And that's what makes it so fascinating to study.
We've just scratched the surface today looking at one day through these headlines, but it's given us a unique glimpse into the forces shaping India.
And hopefully it's left our listeners with some questions too. Questions about how all of this will play out in the coming year, about the choices India faces as it moves forward.
And maybe even questions about how their own lives connect to these bigger trends. That's what makes these deep dives so interesting.
Absolutely. They're not just about learning facts. They're about figuring out our place in the world and understanding the things that shape our lives.
Well said. It's been great exploring these headlines with you, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have.
The pleasure was all mine. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.